Would you like to join us on a family weekend trip to Florence? Let's go then! As there aren't many flights to the airport of Florence, we took a flight to Bologna and then boarded what my son called the Macaroni Express to Florence. There's high-speed trains covering this route and it only takes about 40 minutes from Bologna to Florence. Don't expect to see much on the way though, because the train mainly passes through mountain tunnels. One of the first things that we noticed when arriving in Florence was the huge amount of scooters and bicycles parked everywhere. And it seems to work as a traffic solution because there really wasn't so many cars around the center. The next thing we noticed were the construction works everywhere. We did take a taxi at a certain point during this trip and the taxi driver told us that it's been like this for years. We dropped our bags at the hotel and went to eat at this popular focaccia place. There was quite a bit of a queue, which is usually a good sign. There was a set menu for the focaccia fillings, so you couldn't really pick whatever you wanted. And even though I'm usually very fussy, I was super happy with this carpaccio filled one. It was nice and tender. I loved it, unlike the birds who my son tried to feed with the carpaccio. They definitely don't eat meat. Also, have you ever seen water packed in a Tetra Pak? I haven't before. Well fed and hydrated, it was time to head towards the center. Best part about traveling with kids, they notice every little detail, like these little turtles. And every single toy shop, so of course we had to enter and get lost in this one. While we walked around, we came across this massive hole in the ground inside the shop, and we still wonder what it was to this day. After a while, we finally made it to the center, and the dome was just as amazing as I expected. None of us is really big on queuing or sightseeing, so we just walked around the dome from the outside and admired it from every angle. Now, I knew from before that Florence was very famous for their Fiorentina steak, and I realized just how many of those they must be eating. How else could you explain so many stalls selling leather goods all around the place? Ponte Vecchio is sort of like every other touristic place. If you manage to find an empty corner, which is not too crowded, it's absolutely beautiful. We saw a lot of couples taking their wedding videos and wedding pictures in this area. And it's all picturesque and romantic until you turn the next corner and you end up in a street completely packed with tourists. There were many sellers of beautiful jewelry on the Ponte Vecchio, but you couldn't even really take a look at what they were selling. That's how packed it was. I don't know who likes crowded places, but I definitely don't. And so we ran away and strolled some more in the center. In touristic places such as this one, I always wonder how they must have felt years ago, or how they would look without all these people trying to earn some cash in every possible way, from horse rides to creating art on pavement. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love art, but at a certain point it just becomes so much and so chaotic you can't really see anything anyhow. While strolling through the center, we saw many interesting shops like this hypnotic clock shop, or this duck shop. A shop that literally only sold ducks. Batman ducks, pirate ducks, ducks and more ducks. My kids definitely had a party in there. Luckily, I think it confused them so much they didn't even think of asking for any of those ducks. And it was just the same in this sweet shop. They had a walk around, they admired all the sweets, and happily left without buying anything. I call it a parenting win. Now this is a word of warning for any of you if you ever end up in Italy and get tempted to buy this sort of rainbow pasta. I mean, go ahead if you really want to, but don't be fooled to think this is something that Italians really eat at all. Consider it more of a souvenir. Now it's time to show you one of our family's favorite places in Florence, the Museum of Illusions. It's really worth a visit if you come to Florence with family. It's so much fun, seriously. I can't decide if my favorite bit was this faucet with water flowing out of nowhere and upwards, or this kaleidoscope tube where you could stick your head in and see a never-ending amount of your own heads from all sorts of different angles. This museum can definitely be enjoyed by both parents and kids, and before you know it, you have spent a good 2 hours in there. When traveling with kids, it's twice the disappointment if a place doesn't live up to its hype, but this was definitely not the case. I can 100% recommend it if you're traveling with kids to Florence. I think Florence is a great destination with family because there is always something going on, even if you don't plan an activity, such as this street performance with people dressed up in traditional costumes. In the evening, we walked the streets in search of the best place to try the famous local beef, and we were definitely not disappointed. This fillet was 10 out of 10. And after some 16,000 steps, the first day was done. We started the next day with a pretty standard hotel breakfast. The only thing not so much standard was the amount of muffins that my son demolished. He loves these tiny hotel muffins. While the kids were all sugared up and happy, it was my turn to pick the shops to enter, and I was very curious to see at least one of these many vintage clothing shops. Vintage is absolutely my favorite way to shop. And then I found a shop that literally seemed to be made for me. I normally hate shopping for clothes because I never like anything, yet here I loved pretty much every item. Everything seemed to be in the right color, shape and material. Needless to say, I didn't walk out empty-handed. I'm obviously not showing all we did and ate, but this ice cream place needs a mention. Hands down, the best ice cream I ever ate. Another stop we had on our list was the interactive Da Vinci Museum. And while the boys were spinning and rattling things, I realized wherever you go in Florence, you always need to check the ceiling just in case. My favorite thing here were the open windows that gave me the opportunity to peek out and imagine how it would feel living in one of these buildings a long, long time ago. The museum also had some of the coolest items in the gift shop. I mean, look at these! Can you guess what all these people are queuing for right outside the museum? The famous wine window. How cool is that? On a family trip, Lego sounds more likely than wine, and so obviously we had to enter the local Lego store. And again, look at the ceiling! As my other half didn't get an ice cream with us before, it was his turn, but I have to say, even if it looks all nice and cute here, it just didn't even come close to what we had before. However, ice cream is still ice cream, apparently. Another day, another 17,000 steps. On the day of our flight, we wanted to return to La Gelatiera for more amazing ice cream, but it was sadly closed. It turns out a lot of places are closed in Florence on Monday, so these cream-filled buns had to do. It was all good and nice, but we were still very disappointed. We wanted more ice cream. The disappointment continued at the extremely busy train station with no seats, but we took it like champs and sat on the floor and watched the feet go by. We ate our last focaccia on the train back and arrived at the airport of Bologna, which definitely can't cope with the amount of travelers. Everyone ends up sitting on the floor. Fortunately, the Ryanair seats were as comfy as ever. Thanks for watching, see you soon!